Hey everyone, Brian Zane here with the Raw review on Wrestling with Regret. But before we get into the show proper, of course, the big story that came out today was the champion, Drew McIntyre, has been diagnosed with COVID. Now, first of all, on one hand, I will say that I'm surprised that WWE actually mentioned COVID by name on the air. We don't really hear that at all. They barely acknowledge COVID as a thing, and that's been their MO ever since the pandemic really exploded. However, I'm also surprised, but not surprised, on how little they talked about it on this show. I think that if your top guy has this disease, that should be the first sentence that comes out of commentary's mouths. Some breaking news, the champion's come down with COVID, we'll hear from him later, but first, da-da-da-da. Instead, the show opens up with a Triple H Randy Orton segment, which I'll get into, and then after the first commercial break, we finally get acknowledgement of that. I thought that was really weird to do, and to their credit, Drew's video where he announces it, and by the way, he's the only person who says the word COVID. The announcers sure don't. But Drew has his announcement. He has COVID. He's asymptomatic, which is great. I hope he can recover from all that soon. But he has a nice little PSA where he tells people to wear their masks, practice social distancing, the kind of stuff the company should have been saying as kind of a PSA for a while, but they've really been neglecting that. But yeah, Drew's the only person who says it. If I were the company, I would have had an announcement. I would have reminded people about that at the top of every hour, is to say, hey, and repeat the PSA in their own words, not just have Drew say it. It seems kind of weird that he's the only one who was given the agency or the ability to acknowledge that. Everyone else has kind of kept super mum about it, and they didn't really acknowledge it for the rest of the show. That, to me, was very shocking, not shocking, because we know how they like to sweep that stuff under the rug. But yeah, that was a bit, that really kind of threw me off for pretty much the entire night. But anyway, the show begins not with an announcement of Drew's diagnosis, but rather Triple H opening the show. First time in the Thunderdome for him. Before he can get any words out, though, it's promo interruption time. Randy Orton cuts him off and basically tells Triple H, oh, the office is here because Drew can't be. The first acknowledgement of Drew not being there, but not actually explaining why. So Drew asks Triple H, will you give me the number 30 spot in the Rumble, or you just give me the championship, because they were supposed to wrestle on this night. So basically Triple H talks about how he was a proud papa after Orton burned the Fiend alive at TLC, but he doesn't understand why he's got to beat up and degrade all those legends. His pride for Orton was stripped away after all that, but I mean, that's exactly what you liked about him in Evolution all those years ago, was it not? Orton then challenges Triple H to a good old-fashioned fight, but Triple H says it does not benefit him, so he says no. Orton then ups the ante and says that Triple H's balls are in Stephanie's purse, and Triple H responds with a punch to the mouth. Orton says he'll take that as a yes. We won't find out until later in the show that the challenge has been accepted, but pretty much we know it is here. So it seems kind of a make good for, we're not getting Orton and Drew tonight. We're going to get Triple H and Orton instead, which I think is fine. I can't think anyone else right now who could be slotted in that position to kind of take Drew's place on short notice. Back in gorilla position, Charlotte Flair says that Lacey Evans is not the first nor the last woman to hit on Ric Flair, and Charlotte says, she and her dad have patched things up and she will teach that classless woman how to be like a lady. And then we see Lacey Evans afterwards say, she doesn't flirt with anyone who wouldn't flirt back, and that she's going to dedicate this match to Ric Flair, and blows a kiss. Wasn't she booked as a strong family woman last year? So we get Charlotte versus Lacey up next, and early in the match, Ric Flair shows up and comes to ringside. At this point, he should be as far from the Thunderdome as humanly possible after Drew's COVID diagnosis, but be that as it may, he is there. And then after the commercial break, we see him actually help Lacey break up the pinfall and get into the ropes after natural selection. We get a recreation of the WrestleMania 5 finish where Ric Flair trips up Charlotte mid-suplex his own daughter and keeps her legs down while Lacey gets the pin. The match itself was ended. The whole finish seemed kind of clunky, but anyway, after that, we see Lacey and Rick walking off together, and Lacey's like, I'm going to change in my hotel room. This laugh she does is so funny and it's out of nowhere for her, which made me really laugh a lot. I think that this angle of Lacey being the gold digger, as Matthew said on Twitter, kind of being Anna Nicole Smith, I'm intrigued by that storyline in theory. At the same time, though, shouldn't Flair really stay home at this point in time? Keith Lee is backstage, but before he can do his interview, we get a promo interruption. And this time it's Sheamus who says, you fought really hard with Drew McIntyre last week, and if you earned Drew's respect, you've earned my respect. He wants to patch things up with Lee, but then Miz and Morrison interrupt. So interruption upon interruption. And we get some good banter between Miz and Morrison. They say they want to right the wrongs of 2020 as their New Year's resolution. And so Lee and Sheamus interpret that as a challenge to a match, and they accept. More banter, and so we have that match a bit later on. So the scheduled match is supposed to be Jeff Hardy versus Elias. Now, we saw them have the Symphony of Destruction match a few weeks ago, and I thought that was the feud ender, but apparently it's going to keep on going. But before the match match begins. Elias says he suffered a debilitating injury from recording music, and so Jackson Ryker is going to fill in for him. And this match is pretty short and kind of a nothing thing. Elias is on commentary for maybe 20 seconds before he gets up and distracts Jeff. That allows Ryker to roll up Jeff with a handful of cargo pants for the dirty win. But then Jeff on the microphone calls out Elias to a match right afterward and says, he's afraid of Ryker being better than him. So that convinces Elias to get in this match here. So we have the previously advertised match of Jeff Hardy and Elias. Makes you wonder why they had this little diversion with Jackson Ryker to begin with. So it's a pretty academic match. Jeff Hardy wins the Twist of Fate and the Swanton. Then afterward, Elias asks Ryker, why didn't you help me? And then Ryker goes, because you told me not to. Why are we already building a breakup between these two, where Elias has possible jealousy toward Ryker being better than him? They just started working together and already were planting seeds of dissent. Sheamus and Keith Lee take on The Miz and John Morrison up next, and the first part of the match sees Miz and Morrison is getting bealed hither and yon for a long time. Then finally, Lee checks Morrison into the corner, and that causes the top turnbuckle to pop off and the top rope to kind of totally break. Wow, very good timing. It happens just before the commercial. Lee looks to have the match won when suddenly Sheamus with the blind tag, and he hits the brogue kick on Morrison to win. And so kind of a turnabout's fair play because Lee was doing that to Sheamus occasionally in the weeks leading up to this. So things look to be all right between Lee and Sheamus here. An okay match, definitely a platform for Keith Lee to shine, I think, more than anybody here. And then after we get the backstage interview with Triple H where he accepts Randy Orton's challenge, we suddenly see that Sheamus and Keith are still in the ring and now they're mad at each other, and then we just have an impromptu match. Like, okay. It's another big boy battle, not nearly as intense or dramatic as the Keith Lee-Drew McIntyre match last week. Sheamus should have been counted out at one point, but he just barely escapes the count. But by the timing, he really should have lost it. Lee wins with the Spirit Bomb in the end, and then we see Sheamus giving Lee a big hug. We are just going through all the different phases of this relationship with Keith Lee and Sheamus tonight. I feel like we went through warp speed with this one just because Drew's not there. So before the break, we get a recap of Goldberg calling out McIntyre for the championship. Then after the break, we get a recap of Drew versus Keith, and then includes the extended version of Goldberg's interruption, which includes him incorrectly alleging McIntyre of being disrespectful to the legends. And then we go back to Drew McIntyre in the same exact setting as his COVID-19 PSA from earlier, where he talks about Goldberg and says that, Goldberg let him down and ruined his own legacy by challenging him and putting words into Drew's mouth. And Drew accepts Goldberg's challenge and says that he's next. I mean, the timing and the way they space that out is interesting because, given the recovery time most people have for COVID, Drew will likely be back in time to wrestle at the Royal Rumble. Best case scenario shows up the week before, the go-home Raw. But, at the same time, I thought it was just kind of weird, the disjointed feeling of Drew announcing he has COVID, then like an hour or so later, he comes back in the same exact setting and background and everything to talk about that. I think you could have had him do the PSA, say, I will be back in time, or I hope to be back. When I get back, Goldberg, we'll have this match at the Rumble. Something to tie those two things together. I don't know if it would have been better to keep them I personally think it would have been better, just from a flow perspective, watching the program as a viewer, to keep those two things together, instead of having the two from the very same shoot split miles apart from each other. We see Riddle talking about pizza backstage with the Lucha House Party, and they tell him to watch his back in his match with Lashley later on, and Riddle's like, that's physically impossible, bro. Like, they have totally RV deified Matt Riddle, and you hate to see it. In our next match, Xavier Woods takes on TBar of Retribution. This match, I loved Woods' comeback in this match in particular. I love also TBar's sell out the ring after Xavier's missile dropkick, but in the end, TBar ends up winning with the eyes wide shut. Good for them. Another notch in the win column for Retribution, and at least Ricochet was spared this time around. Well, backstage, Randy Orton says he still has a lot of self-hatred after what he didn't do to Alexa Bliss a couple weeks ago on Raw, but now he can embrace the hate and direct that hate toward people like Triple H. And in our next match for the U.S. Championship, Bobby Lashley defends against Riddle. Lashley jumps Riddle before the bell rings, gets the advantage right away. It's a pretty one-sided match here. Riddle's mouth gets busted open, Lashley gets the hurt lock put in, and Riddle taps out. But Riddle on the mic then challenges MVP to a match on the spot. Why are we getting this angle twice in one show, where the person who loses then calls out somebody else else, the corner man at ringside for an immediate rematch. So anyway, we get Riddle versus MVP. Riddle gets some licks in, but Lashley comes in and breaks it up, causes the match to be thrown out for DQ. And some more extra shots for good measure. A big kick by MVP to the gut of Riddle afterwards. So the angle's not over yet, but the way they are really, it's weird. It's a combination of they're light on time, so they got to pad it with extra rematches and extra hype packages and everything. But at the same time, they're so they're just they're rushing all these different angles, not only with the Keith Lee and Sheamus stuff, but also Riddle and MVP and this Hardy Riker Elias thing. It just feels like they're packing a lot, several weeks of content into one episode. AJ Styles is backstage with Adam Pearce, and he discusses the wildly extreme hypothetical of AJ and Adam Pearce for the Universal Championship at WrestleMania. Then Drew Gulak walks in, says he's declaring himself to be at the Rumble match, and then Pearce is like, you can't just declare yourself for the Rumble match, despite the fact that everyone else is doing it that way. So he makes a match with Drew Goo versus Styles up next. I love Drew's Tampa Bay Buccaneers inspired gear for this evening. So anyway, he gets dumped out of the ring and then spends an inordinate amount of time selling the size of Amos's shoe on the outside. That really freaks him out. So anyway, he gets back in the ring. Phenomenal forearm by Styles to win, and Drew is not going to be in the Rumble match. We get a hype package all about Goldberg in preparation for the Royal Rumble, and then backstage we see Triple H is approached by Keith Lee, and Keith says, you've had my back here since day one, so I want to have your back tonight. He's offering to replace Triple H and face Orton himself in this fight, but Triple H says, it's something I gotta do alone. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler take on Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke next, and before the match, we get a promo from Mandy and Dana where they declare they're going to be in the Women's Rumble match. I thought we just heard Adam Pearce say you can't just enter yourself into the Rumble match. What are the rules? Anyway, this match ends very similar to the last tag match we saw on this night, where Nia Jax has the match well in hand. Suddenly, Shayna tags herself in, much to Nia's chagrin. Shayna makes Mandy tap out of the cure for the clutch, so at least she won a match. That's nice. You'll love to see it after a couple of weeks. But boy, they sure look excited that they won the match, didn't they? In a fight, Triple H takes on Randy Orton in Triple H's first match since 2019 and his first match on Raw in God knows how long. Triple H lands the first punch and they start trading blows. They brawl on the outside for a bit. Triple H produces the sledgy, and as he does that and gets into the ring, the lights begin to cut out. Suddenly, the business end of Triple H's sledgehammer catches fire. The lights completely cut out. When they come back up, Triple H has just evaporated somewhere, and Alexa Bliss is now in the ring, standing across from Randy Orton. She holds up one of her gloves that shows the word pain on it, and then she shoots a fireball in Randy Orton's face. And give Orton credit, he sells out like a madman. He could be possibly blinded. He's just writhing all over the place, seeming to be in pain. A very dramatic way to end the show as we fade to black. It was quite a twist. Triple H coming in to fill in for Drew was a bit of a red herring, because what we saw here in this fight, there was no resolution, there was no conclusion. It was just basically them trying to fill the void left by the champion here, and it was basically a means to an end of the Alexa Bliss interruption of the fireball. The fireball spot was cool, I guess, and I think that it was a good way to end on a cliffhanger, but at this point, I just have no idea who I'm supposed to be cheering for. My grade for this week's Raw is a D+. Now, I get they probably had to scramble a fair amount to cover for Drew's absence in this show, but normally when there is some big dramatic change that affects the roster in some way like this, WWE is usually able to come through with a really good replacement or substitution or something else to kind of make up for that lack of what they're promoting. I'm not sure we got that on this night. Why did we get so many guys wrestling twice? Why do we have these copy and paste results of certain spots, like the immediate rematch or the blind tag in a tag team match? The whole show felt so disorganized, like a mad dash to fill for time, even more so than sometimes it feels like. Except for maybe a couple of moments, I really wasn't feeling tonight's episode. And I must reiterate how shocking it was that Drew McIntyre's COVID diagnosis was such a minor blip on the radar on this show. I'm not saying you gotta overblow it, because he is asymptomatic and he will surely be fine, but I think that if your top guy, or one of the two if you're counting him and Roman Reigns, if one of your top guys comes down with COVID, I think you should make a bigger deal out of it and just use that opportunity to further reiterate the PSA that Drew himself said. But what did you think of Raw this week? Let me know in the comments section below. And stay tuned for this Wednesday when my next classic review is of the final WCW Nitro. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.